All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are doing the first of two live shows for A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, Book 3 in A Song of Ice and Fire. I am joined by my three co-hosts of this read-along, and I'm so excited to be here because this is one of those books that I've been anticipating for months since we started talking about this read-along, planning for this read-along. This is one of the ones that I have read it before, but it's every single time that I've read it, it's always just been another elevated experience over the time I read it previously, and this was no exception. So I'm really excited to talk about it here. I'm going to have everyone kind of go around, introduce himself, and maybe just share some general thoughts on A Storm of Swords overall before we start diving into some of the more specific things in this book. So, Scott, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'm Scott, the Bald Booktuber. I think it's the best fantasy book ever written. I've felt that way since I first read it in 2001, I guess, or 2002. I think this was my fifth or sixth read when I factor in things like the audio and just reading it. And yeah, it hits just as hard every single time that I read it, this being absolutely no exception. So I had a fantastic time. I think I read it at the end of March, so hopefully I've remembered everything for this discussion, but yeah, it's really fantastic. And thanks for being here, everybody, to hear us talk about it.
Cool. Well, my name is Joanna from the channel Joana Sousa, and I read mostly fantasy. And this is, I think, I agree with you, Scott, the best book I've ever read. I think it's my favorite book I've ever read. And it's only my second time reading it, though. So, but it was just so good. I was sitting on, I listened to it in 5 days, roughly 5 days over Easter weekend. And I literally canceled plans. I told people, no, don't walk with me. People are like, oh, do you want me to go on a walk with you? He's like, no, I want to go alone so I can listen to this. Because, yeah, this book is so good. I was sitting on the train thinking I wish direwolves were real and they weren't bonded to me. And I just, love this book so much. I'm so excited to talk about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and my name is Joanna from the channel Joanna or Joanna Reads. And this book, I had forgotten how much happens in this book. And I know, Alex, you had said that many times, that so much happens in this book. But there were so many things that happened in this book that I kept expecting to happen on reread in books 4 and 5. I'm like, oh no, that actually happens in this book. I mean, it's wild. What I did earlier this morning is I went through and I made a list of what I think could be considered the climactic moments in the book. And I came up with like 15 to 17. 15 to 17 climaxes in this book. And that doesn't even count all the quieter moments that are so rich and so incredible. And I mean, I think we've said this before, and I know I'm not the first to say this, but I mean, it really is a series that you can read and just enjoy kind of like at a surface level, or you could just take it so many levels deeper. And I feel like I'm still not scratching the surface on this series. I feel like I'm just like, there's so much there. There's so much there. And yet it's written in such an accessible way that you could just burn through it it did take me a while though. I did not listen to the audiobook. I just refuse for the series because I feel like the character voices are so distinct in my mind that I just have to use my imagination for them. And so I did take a long time to read it, but I loved every minute of it. It was so, so good.
Yeah, I agree. Did this one physical completely. And it took me probably 2 weeks to get through, but every time I was sitting down to read it, you could knock out like 100 pages, 200 pages easily, like without even thinking about it, because it's just George's writing is so accessible. And this book is, I mean, you hit a certain point in this book, probably 60% of the way through. And from that point on, it is every single chapter is nonstop, huge climactic moment, like Joanna was saying. And I was in the same boat as you. Like there were certain events towards the very, very end that I was like, I don't think this is going to happen in this book. And then it happened. I was like, I guess it does. I totally forgot that it happens in Storm of Swords, but it was just like adding to the list. And what's cool about it is that because despite the fact that, you have all these world lore shattering, like world building shattering events happening, it never really feels forced. Like everything feels set up and structured to the point that it's all deserved, and it's all like been earned in the page count and the time that George has spent building it. It's not like, oh, he's just trying to cram in all these crazy events to make this the biggest shock value of a book out there. Like, it could feel like that because of just the amount of stuff that does happen in this book, but I think it's all surprisingly paced pretty well, even though it is like chapter after chapter after chapter for the last like 300 pages. It's just kind of that shocking type event situation. So
yep.
There's some events that I think happen in towards the beginning of the book, where with any other book, this would be like the climactic moment. It would happen at the end, and then cliffhanger next book, you know? And then here it's like, wait, this has happened in the first 200 pages or something like that. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Do you all mind if I go through my list?
Yep, go for it.
Do you want to
Not
tell
at
me
all.
if
Go
you
for
would
it.
have any? Because I'm sure I missed some. Like, that's the crazy part. So what I tried to do was break it down by character because it was too hard for me to go through the whole book in my head from beginning to end. And this was just free flow through my thoughts. So with Jaime, these are just climactic moments. I'm not even talking about, like, there are so many, like I said, rich, quieter moments, build up moments also. But with Jaime, I would say when it gets his hand cut off, and the bear scene when he goes back to save Brienne, and with Sansa when she is to wed Tyrion, I felt like that was pretty climactic. And then, of course, the Littlefinger escape, the Tully death at the end, Lisa Tully's death, and then with Catelyn, the Red Wedding, her appearance at the end, which I totally forgot happened in this book after she died. Supposedly, and then with Jon Snow, the attack at the wall, Ygritte's death in that appearance there. Then Davos, Stannis, and Melisandre arriving, so it's kind of like a "Here Comes the Cavalry" sort of trope going on there. Very weird. And then Tyrion, the wedding scene with Joffrey dying, the trial. In the trial, I feel like there's so many climactic moments happening in that trial. So like the Mountain and Martell and that duel, and then Shay coming on trial, by the way. That felt climactic to me. And then his confession scene about how he's guilty of being a dwarf. I was like, this is the most insane thing ever. And then I put number 12. Oh, yeah. For Tyrion also, the escape. So Jaime helping him escape. And then killing, of course, Tywin and Shay. And then I put as a possible, with Arya, I put the Beric Dondarrion scene, I think. I mean, that's part of it, I guess. I don't know. But I think with her, it's more the Hound kidnapping her. That was the big climax with her arc. And then with Sam, possibly even, I put, at the very end, I put Mormont's death. And I'm like, in any other fantasy book, I feel like Mormont's death would be such a big deal. But I almost forgot it. Because there was, that's like, I got up to almost 15, I think, that list. I don't know. I'm sure I missed some.
No, it's a great list. I would add Sam bringing the Night's Watch together to get Jon elected as the next captain.
That was
I think a big deal.
That is a big deal. You're right. Yeah.
Rob beheading Karstark at the beginning. Towards the beginning was
so rough because he feels like he has to do it, but it's terrible that he does it because now it's gonna alienate an entire big part of his army. Like, that's just so rough to read.
That was rough.
It's like you understand why he did it, but you also understand how Rob views it as like being a leader who's trying to ban this group of people around his ideal that's kind of failing as he's going along, and he himself is kind of going against what he is saying he represents by breaking oaths here and there, like when it comes to the Walder Frey marriage, obviously. And yet he still carries it out no matter what, which is something that that's an event that you don't see, I guess, in a lot of fantasy. In a situation like that, he might get really close to doing it and then forgive him and then kind of be like, hold you on a short leash from there on out. And this one was like, even if I forgive you now, I'm still going to execute you. It's part of,
or exile them as an alternative to execution.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd see some of that. But yeah, like if I'm a Karstark, I'm thinking you're choosing the Lannister family over your own king, which is not good. So,
yeah. So
I feel like that whole setup to that too is pretty profound too. Sorry.
For sure. Oh, I was just going to expand on.
Go for it.
No, you go.
No, I was like, isn't it in this book where Sam also kills a white? Like everything happens in this book.
That's true. Good point. Another one.
Like,
Sam kills the white, and they, it's pretty important.
And Dany.
Too, Dany, I forgot to put Dany
Unsullied.
down.
The the dragon is not a slave scene, like where she sells her dragon. That's what I was referring to. I feel like in any other book that would have been like her climactic moment at the end of her story in this book, and then it happens like so early on. I'm like, I forgot it happened this early.
And the reveal about the knight. I cannot remember his name now.
Sir George?
Yeah,
George
no.
The other one?
Barristan Selmy.
Oh, so Barristan Selmy, yeah.
Oh, right.
Barristan Selmy.
Barristan Selmy showing
I mean,
up.
I think we all knew
awesome.
that. I mean, even on first read, I think it's pretty obvious, but still, it's still kind of a big deal for her to be faced with that. And then with Jorah's exile there, and my goodness, like, there's a lot I could talk about with that.
I know. Well, I think this book is so big and there's so many different things going on, so many different characters, that I think it kind of makes sense to at least start the discussion by breaking it up in chunks based on character or even location. And since we're talking about Dany, I think we'll start with Dany, since I think she probably has, she is all by herself in isolation from everything else that's going on in the story. So it's a little bit, just a little bit easier to digest what she is doing. We only have her point of view at this point. So it is a very interesting type of progression that her story goes in this book, particularly because A Clash of Kings, she had a few chapters. She has the big like House of the Undying chapter, but she doesn't have a ton of page count in that book. Storm of Swords, she has more. But compared to some of the other characters, it's still not enough. It's still not as much. But she has some huge, she's really great, gaining momentum in what she's doing, and she gets the Unsullied. So I think let's just talk about Dany for a few minutes. What do you guys think of Dany at this point? Like, do you, and everything that go on? I mean, I guess when she gets the Unsullied, when she goes to Yunkai and Marine, and finds out that Jorah betrays her, and all those different things. Like, what were your opinions and thoughts on Dany's chapters in A Storm of Swords?
I think it's pretty interesting leading up to the buying of the Unsullied that it's one of the few times that Selmy and Mormont actually agree. Like, they're telling her, don't do this. It might be for different reasons or whatnot, but neither of them want her to pursue this. And I'd like to think through whether she actually, knew where this was leading, and she was going to, make them believe she was buying them and then attack the masters, or whether that was a spur of the moment decision. And I don't know where I come down on that, but that whole sequence is just unbelievable. So good.
I think that's one of my favorite scenes. Like, sometimes I randomly rewatch that scene from the show just because I just love it that much. And I mean, you guys know I love Daenerys, so her chapters always, and I kind of noticed that her and Jon's chapters were often back to back in this book specifically. So that was, I thought, quite interesting as we were approaching the end. Not really, but kind of, know. So I thought that was really interesting. And seeing her also, this is what you said last time, I think, Alex, that through the House of the Undying, that she would, from that moment on forward, she would always think about the treasons that she was prophesied and all of that. And so she kept on thinking about it. And you could see how that has impacted it. And even she thinks about Quaithe again at some point. And you can see that she's really kind of torn in between, and how she's doing things like she wants to go to Westeros, but she's still doing this stuff here. And I find it so fascinating to see her go through all of it, and then surrounding herself with new people and trying to get advice from everybody and trying to make her own decisions for herself.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting, just the challenges of leadership that we see happening in Jon, from Jon's leadership perspective. Rob, even though we don't get Rob's POV, he's still obviously with the Karstark situation. He's dealt with some very difficult decision making there. And then with Dany in this book, her decision making is very challenged. And there's a lot of, I feel like, I know it's very common in fantasy to use utilitarian arguments, like, do we sacrifice the innocent or the one for the greater good of the all? But I feel like the way that Martin approaches that particular type of argument is pretty masterful, and he does it in multiple ways. And so I feel like she's really faced with those decisions, really difficult decisions. So even though this is less maybe about her decisions as a leader in those specific arenas with the Unsullied. I just want to say that when it comes to Dany's chapters, the one thing that I think got to me personally the most was her dynamics with Jorah, because the way that I read that, I thought it was absolutely incredible that she was able to call him out twice in the book. She called him out twice for him trying to build a codependent relationship with him, for him trying to isolate her choices so that he's the only one that she turns to, and not to trust anybody else. And both times, I think she acknowledges, even after he betrays her, I think she knows or feels hard. She feels very strongly, and we start to feel this, I think, as readers, though I'd love to hear your opinions, that Jorah probably has the best intentions in mind. He actually probably does truly care about her, but she knows that, but it still doesn't make it right. The way he's going about that, the way he's trying to build that codependency. And he might not even be aware that he's building a toxic relationship, but it is. And the way he crosses her boundaries, calling her by her name and making that pass on her, those were crossing boundaries. And like, she asserts herself, she recognizes that didn't feel good, and she feels conflicted, and she cares about him. And the way that like that is represented, and the way she stands up for herself in the end and asserts her boundaries, I thought was so empowering to read about from a female perspective in fantasy. I thought it was so young. She's so young.
So you see her, and you kind of have also the other young people in this book, but her being so young and being able to do all of that is what's so impressive, because she's all alone in the world for all she knows, and she doesn't know what Mr. Aemon is still there and stuff. So she thinks she's the last of the Targaryens, and all this whole dynasty is like on her shoulders. Plus, she's now the mother of dragons, and she's so young, and she's just going with it. And it's why I love her.
Yeah. And it's neat too, because there's actually one particular section where I think Jorah is telling her, I cannot remember which character, if it's Dario or a different character, he's saying, don't listen to this character, don't listen to this person. And she said something about like a true leader listens to all perspectives. It doesn't matter who it is. I will listen to everyone. And then there's a side note where she says she read that in a book. And I thought that's kind of cool. Like, she's well read. She pays attention. She's such a smart character. And I think she has some understanding of what it means to be treated well from her past love. And, I don't know, but I really appreciated that she did display the agency she did display, because obviously she didn't have much in previous books. But in this book, she really, really asserted herself. And it was, it was so
She's really grown.
I think at one point she also tells Selmy, if I remember correctly, she said, feel free to talk to me like that privately, but once I've made a decision publicly, you have to support me, which, is one thing I like to hear in this kind of storytelling, because that's how command and leadership should be. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah. I mean, she has grown so much as a character from the first book to this book. And the fact that at the end of this book, she's basically like, well, I'm going to rule here. She's like, I'm going to, while I definitely want to go to Westeros, like that is my end goal for the time being, I'm going to rule here. And this is going to be these are who I'm going to take care of and watch over. Is very telling about where her character is at this point in time, and how it's, how it's been shaped from everything that she's encountered along the way. Barristan Selmy appearing, when he first appears and announces him, like says who he is such a cool scene. He like reveals himself. And Jorah's like, oh shit, I know who you are. I know who you are. But Barristan offers a really cool perspective into this, because he starts telling Daenerys a lot more history and background of the Targaryen family and of her dad. And so this is like the first time outside of her brother and like a few of the other people who are kind of like had toxic relations with her along the way, telling her bits and pieces about the history of Mad King Aerys and Rhaegar and all these other people within her family. This is like a new perspective from someone who, directly served and then went against her father. And there are a few moments in this book where, as a result of all of the conversations that she's having with Selmy, she's like, am I mad? Am I going mad for some of the actions that she takes in this book, like burning the slave, like killing the slave masters and all that stuff. And she really starts to become a little bit more introspective in that realm. Like, am I just like my father? And I really like that because I just thought it was, despite the fact that, yeah, she is so young, she is massively changed from where she was in a Game of Thrones.
Yeah, she's self-reflective and she wants to learn more about her history, to learn about herself.
Yeah. When Targaryens are born, the gods flip a coin. That's what I know. So we'll see how it goes. But, the other cool thing about Selmy that I really like, it harkens back to Clash of Kings, because when Catelyn goes to visit Renly's first question to her was, is Selmy with you? That one needs a king to serve. So, I always think about that because he found his king/queen to serve, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's true.
That's awesome. Do you guys, what do you guys think of Jorah, like, as a character? Like, do you empathize with him at the end of that? Or do you just you're like, okay, good, you're gone. I'd rather have Dany without you. Like, how do you guys feel about him? Because I think that's a character who I do think a lot of people's perceptions of him are affected by the TV show. I think the TV show kind of took his character in a slightly different direction, and the actor did it really well. But how he's written in the book is a little bit different.
How would you compare the two? Do you think he's a more sympathetic character in the show?
I would think he's more well-intentioned in the show. And I think in the book, he's a little bit like, he still definitely has good intentions of the way of like what he's doing, but he is like you were saying, he crosses a lot of boundaries. He is, building a toxic relationship with a really young person and was betraying her in the beginning, and he's just a very conflicted individual that is different. And I feel like in the show, those things are still happening along the way. He still gets betrayed. He still does all these things, but I don't know. I just think that in the book, the way it's written, you can kind of see a little bit more of what boundaries he's crossing, and he crosses them more frequently in the book. So it kind of shifts your perception of his character.
I wish I could remember better how I felt about him the first time I read the books, but I really think that I might have been, hesitate to say, a little more sympathetic towards him my first read through. But it's hard to know, because often my situation is, if I watch an adaptation after I read a book, my memory is altered by the adaptation. So, and I think you're right. I think he was made out to be more sympathetic in the show than in the books. In the books, I feel like you said, he crossed some boundaries. I feel like it's pretty, at least from Dany's perspective, you get the sense that he probably deep down does care about her. But at the same time, I really didn't like what he did. I really didn't like it. I didn't like that he never came out and told her the truth at the beginning. I don't like that he crossed those boundaries. He wasn't careful about it. He wasn't willing for her consent ahead of time. And another red flag that came up for me with him was after he went through the sewers and everything, like how resentful and bitter he was. Like, he came across kind of like, we did that for you kind of thing. And I was like, no. I know you smell bad, and I get that's not a pleasant task, but no, I felt like he felt to me like there were so many red flags that were not comfortable for me. That just spoke to, even if he did care about her, even if he was well-intentioned, I think you could still feel that way and still be toxic. And I think he was toxic.
I agree with you.
He's still expecting something from her in return for his service.
I think he's someone obviously controlled by lust. So even going back to why he's having to live this exile life in the first place is, he was trying to impress his wife at the time, Lannister, and he was, poaching in a place he knew he couldn't hunt, doing things he knew he couldn't do. And when Ned went to, extend the king's justice, he fled. And so he's living that. He's trying to redeem parts of that, but ultimately, even when he says she looked a little bit like you, like that stuff is just all gross to me. Like he's trying to relive this failed marriage he had previously. He's well advanced in age to her, which I know is different in this world than others, but still, you can't be her protector and be her lover. That crosses lines that it shouldn't cross in my opinion. So there are a lot of really bad things about Jorah. I still like the character in general, and I like to read when he's talking historically about what he's seen and what he's done, but ultimately dirty old man is the biggest thing I think when I think of
yeah. I agree. I think this show has really, like, how do you say that? In my brain, I kind of conflate the two. I'm like, oh, but just in the books, I agree with you guys.
And he's uglier in the books too.
Yeah,
correct. Oh, I know.
They picked a really good-looking dude.
That doesn't hurt him in the show, I guess. You know what I also always forget with Dany? It's how young Miss Sunday is, because in the show she's an adult, and isn't she like 9 or 10 in the books?
Yeah, she's super young. Yeah.
Right, and it's so sad. Yeah. And also when they told, I kind of forgot. I don't remember if the show did this, but about the Unsullied and their dogs and everything.
Yeah,
and it's just so sad.
I think they may have commented about it, but it wasn't.
Maybe
the book really explained it all.
I think Missandei says that like 5 of the Unsullied are brothers of hers as well. They're going through and they're talking through this timeline of how someone becomes an Unsullied, and that whole process. Just you got to kill your puppy, and you got to.
Oh my gosh!
Just the whole thing.
Take newborns away from their moms.
Yeah,
brutal. But yeah, I mean, I think Dany's chapters in this book are awesome. I think I'm trying to think. There's a part like right around when the Red Wedding happens, where one of her chapters happens, where she, like the Misa mother chapter that is also where they end season 3 of the show.
Right.
It's still a great scene, even though, it's in the middle of the book, and it's just like, wow, this could end the book. Like if we wanted to. And you see why they chose that aspect to end that portion of the TV show season. But
I am curious about her form of justice, though, because I know one thing that I appreciate about Dany is she does take, like, her choice to stay there, for example. I mean, she feels the weight of responsibility. She lets it weigh on her heart. So I feel like there's a lot of heart in her choices. And at the same time, her form of justice feels very vengeance filled. I mean, doing the same thing to those people, like the way they were nailed and stuff.
Like, do you think she feels more antagonistic? Like, do you think she's written in an antagonistic way compared to like some of the other characters in the book?
Well, I wonder about that, because I know she's trying to kind of create a revolution too with like freeing slaves, but it also kind of made me wonder, because it's like, what are your choices? You're free, or it kind of also felt like it echoed back to Jon Snow's chapter when he's talking to Ygritte. He's like, oh, so if I'm a free man, does that mean I'm free to leave? She said, yeah, and we're free to kill you. And so it's like, what does freedom really mean? And so I feel like George R.R. Martin might be exploring that in that perspective of part of the world, as well as beyond the wall too. But I did wonder about that. I'm like, because it must have been horrible to see those children nailed every so often on that journey. And she refused to let Daario take them down. She wanted to see each one as they were dying or dead. And then she decides to do a similar treatment. And then like the choice to be free or follow, I don't know. It just made me question things. It did raise some questions for me this time around.
Yeah, I agree. There's a few, I remember, I don't know what part of the book it was, but I feel like there were a few conversations in the book where Daario would bring up like, oh, some of the slaves like want to be back. They don't understand this concept of freedom.
Yes.
Like,
they're teachers.
You telling
stuff. They have a nice cushion
like you telling them they're free doesn't solve
right
much if they don't understand what's the next step out of slavery if this is the only thing I've ever known my entire life? Like, how
Yeah.
if you're not going to help me, I just want to go back to what was comfortable. Like,
Well,
what
that's,
was
and
my
there's some truth
reality.
to that, right? Even in our real world. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
or
that I think
even
is a
just-
big. Oh, sorry, go for
Sorry.
it. I was just gonna say, I think that that's something that's just so reflective of how it really is with everything, where someone tries to help you with whatever it is, and then like, okay, great, and what do I do now? And people sometimes they think that, oh, by freeing slaves or by, I don't know, whatever it is, you've done the work. It's cool, good, but that's where it actually just starts. Like freeing the slaves was one thing, but everything she has to do after is the actual work, and that's what will show what kind of ruler she is. I think so.
Yeah, and she doesn't take that lightly, like we said. I mean, her choice to stay, I
Yeah.
think, shows that she doesn't take that lightly. She lets that weigh on her.
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree. I mean, she's a very interesting character because on the one hand, she's the only perspective you're getting of everything that's going on that side of the world. So you do empathize with her, like you feel for her cause, and I like watching her, how she's grown. But on the other side of the coin, I do see like she does have some tendencies that do seem, more antagonistic, more vengeful than some of the other characters are showing. So I don't know. It's just part of the aspect of why I like the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, because there's no one size fits all for any.
No, I love that about the series.
Yeah. And you kind of have to remember she was raised by her crazy brother who was telling her everything's about revenge. We need to get our throne back. And then she was married to a warlord. So everything she's known is about this kind of treatment of people. Sure. Had she been raised by Ned Stark, what would have happened? So that's always a question.
One thing we know about George is he isn't afraid to show us the warts. It's not going to be perfect. So there are
so true.
The unintended and many times negative consequences to the very things that happen. Yeah. And that's a great point about what her interactions have been, because I think it's going to go in a certain direction. We'll see whether it does or not. So,
yeah. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any more thoughts on Dany, we can kind of move to another part of the world. I guess, we could either talk about Jon Snow in the north, or we can go over to like Tyrion, Riverlands, and talk about like Catelyn. Let's talk about Catelyn, because I feel like the book kind of kicks off, outside of the prologue, the book kind of kicks off with a big decision that Catelyn makes of letting Jaime go and sending Jaime with Brienne of Tarth to go with the idea that Jaime is going to hold his word and is going to let her two daughters go, and she believes Arya and Sansa are both at King's Landing.
Sure.
What did you guys think of this decision? And from everything that we know of reading the first two books in the series, has your opinion of Catelyn shifted at this point, or did this just make it only more cemented in how you felt about her?
I understand her desire to trade him for the daughters. I think it puts her son in a very, very challenging position. She's trying to, help groom him to be a leader and to command this large host. And his bannermen and stuff are not going to be super thrilled that he can't, keep his own mother from, releasing the most important person in that camp. So it's going to be very, very untenable from Rob's perspective. And she obviously didn't consult with anybody. She made her choice, and it puts him in an almost unwinnable position at that point. And it's also going to damage the relationship between the two of them. And obviously we know it sets up even bigger things beyond that. But it's I always get a little upset when that happens, because that's going to be tough on Rob and on the entire army. So
yeah, absolutely.
You kind of understand it, because at this point she thinks that Sansa and Arya are the only ones alive except for Rob. Sure. But he's also at war all the time, so how long is he going to stay alive for?
Sure.
But at the same time, we're like, but no. And this goes back to what you were saying earlier. Do we save the few to like the one or the two in this case versus the many? And so she picks her kids, like her two daughters, above the North almost, and everyone in this war. So it's really hard. I mean, I don't know what I would have done in such a situation, but when you're reading it, like, did you really have to, though? Really?
I know.
It's pretty selfish, because they all have sons and daughters and parents and stuff.
Exactly.
Well. So putting her own kids over everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's Rob's sisters too. Like, it's not like Rob doesn't not have any connection with them or anything.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's not easy for him.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, when we think back on Clash of Kings, she is in a very vulnerable position.
Sure.
Having just learned that your two youngest boys, who you left, I think there has to
Yep.
be some
Yeah.
guilt there,
Definitely.
have been massacred, or at least she believes that. And on top of that, that her dad just died. And it just seems like, she's made it pretty clear from the beginning that she didn't really care about, even like in Clash of Kings, her motives were pretty clear. She didn't care so much about the war. She wanted the safety of her children. She didn't care about Rob being king so much.
Yeah.
That was more about, it was much more than that. It was much more about family. That was really what was at the heart of everything for her. So when Bran and Rickon were reported to be dead, I think that just took her over the top. But I also think that discussion she had with Jaime Lannister, I mean, she felt like she felt pretty secure in the deal she made with Tyrion, but also I feel like that I went back and looked at that because I did that whole Jaime Lannister video on my channel.
Yeah.
And
So good,
I
by the
went,
way.
That's great.
thanks. Thank you. I loved it. It was like a passion project for me. I'm like, I have to get this out. I have to but anyway, that whole discussion she has with Jaime, I feel like the thing is, he makes it pretty clear about what he thinks about vows and all the vows they make you take in order to be in the King's Guard. However, he also speaks some truth to her. He tells her some things that she cannot deny. There's some truth there to it. And so I feel like there's part of her that just can't help but believe, one, in his honesty, and the honesty that he's put forth in sharing some of those things, like about Brandon and Rickard Stark. But also, in addition to that, like, I feel like he kind of, he probably is also speaking when he's telling her things about honor doesn't mean anything, and giving her a very cynical worldview at a time when she's very vulnerable and she lost everything she was living for. It was almost like he played almost like a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word for it and I can't think of it. But he's sort of playing a certain role, like a certain dramatic role of like tempting that thought pattern, the more negative, sinister, cynical thought pattern about how the world works and what's the least amount she can get from this whole horrible situation. So I feel like I could kind of understand her reasoning, especially with Jaime. I feel like it almost came across manipulative, even though I don't think he was being manipulative per se, maybe a little. But I feel like it just kind of all made sense to me why she did what she did. Not saying it was the right thing, but it just made sense. And then after all of that, like, the thing that I also want to point out is that even though she was in a vulnerable situation, and it's understandable in my mind why she made the horrible mistakes she made in some ways, I also want to point out that whenever this news comes out to the forefront with Edmure and with the other people in the company, they all blame it on her being a female. They all blame it on her being the weakness of a woman. And this is why women can't lead. Rob comes in and he betrayed an oath. He ended up marrying Jane Westerling. Nobody is saying that
Right.
about attributing that to his gender role. And so I don't know. It's very complicated. But I do also want to say one more thing, which is that I feel like she has a shift right before they go over to the phrase, right before the red wedding scene. At one point she said, oh, what was it? I can't remember what it was exactly, but there was a scene, and maybe you all can remember for me, where she's talking to Rob and she's like, at this point, it's about vengeance. Like suddenly her motivations shift and it's all about vengeance from then on out. Maybe it's because of the Lannisters or something. I cannot remember exactly what it was about Tyrion. I guess she finds out Tyrion and Sansa are married. I don't know if it's because of that, but she's like, nope, like this is about vengeance at this point. Maybe she realizes she's not going to get her daughters back. I don't know. But she's like, it's about vengeance at this point. We're switching around. So she's lost it. She's lost. You just see her losing every shred of humanity throughout this whole entire 3 books.
Literally at the end too. So
yes, literally.
I I've never minded the Catelyn chapters. I actually think they're really good in terms of kind of the foreshadowing and a bunch of stuff that's baked into them. The Storm of Swords ones with her chapters in this book, I loved. I feel like, especially on this read, for some reason, they just stuck out to me a little bit more than they have previously. And every single one leading up to, the Red Wedding was just tremendous. And I also think it helps that we don't get like Rob's point of view, or we don't get like some of these other characters that are with her. So that's our viewpoint into everything that's going on in this situation. And so it does add a very, like, as you're seeing her character kind of definitely shift, you're also seeing kind of everything around their situation collapsing slowly, and then all of a sudden very fast. And I think with that said, we could definitely talk about Rob and marrying Jane Westerling, and then of course setting up Edmure Tully to marry the Frey daughter and going to the Red Wedding. So your bloody wedding. This is just like, this whole situation was something that I think if you've read the books or if you've seen the show, it's coming. That this is something that everyone talks about. As someone who's read the books more than once, I remember the scene vividly. And literally every single chapter leading up to the actual chapter where it all happens, including that chapter, I was just more on edge than I just super as on edge as I ever am. Like it's very, very well done. And I can't imagine reading that for like, I remember when I read it for the first time, because I read it before the third season of the TV show came out. So I was very shocked, but I can't imagine
and he does this in her POV character. She dies in her own POV character. And it's like, how ruthless are you?
I know. Her inner monologue at the end of that chapter where she's like, God, I'd have to find it. But she's talking to herself as she's like, all of a sudden she felt the warm or cold drip down her neck or something like that. And she's like talking to Ed or talking to Ned in her brain. It was just heartbreaking.
Ned always loved my hair or something.
Yeah, Ned always loved my hair.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I read it, The Red Wedding, and how insane I thought it was. And then I remember the first time I reread it, and I'm sitting there like slapping my head going, it's very clear something very horrible happened. All this stuff is leading up to very bad things. Like you can see all of the Freys just upset, and they're ready for violence as they're going to the town, the twins. And like, it is just so masterfully done from a foreshadowing perspective that I can't believe I missed it the first time, but I remember.
I know.
It is so incredibly horrific in atmosphere, like the way that it's all muddy and gross going up to the venue, and then the tents and the rain and the fires, and people can't even stay dry under the tarps, and like the clash of music, like the dissonant music, and they're like, wow, Frey really doesn't have his hearing all there. Like, my goodness, like there were so many signs of something ominous coming. It was so gross. I was like, I just would hate to be, that's the one place I think in this whole world I would never want to be, is in that, at the twins, because it's gross. It was gross.
I just wanted to yell, listen to the dog, because they keep mentioning like Grey Wind barking and not wanting to go in. I'm just like, he knows what's going on.
Just trust the dog.
That broke my heart.
I know.
Yeah.
When Rob, at one point, when he's talking to his mom, well, this is in the Catelyn chapter, of course, and she's like, where's Grey Wind? He's like, oh, Grey Wind feels a bit uncomfortable around these people. So he's just someone like, you are an idiot. Yeah.
Catelyn tries to be wise. She said, make sure the first thing you do is get guests right. Didn't save them, but she said, make sure you get some salt and some wine or whatever and get your guest right. But obviously, guest right was not honored in this case.
No. But also something that Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Okay.
Oh, something I absolutely love about Catelyn in this book is how she tells Rob, like, if Grey Wind doesn't trust this person, I don't trust this person. And if you remember back in her first POV chapter in A Game of Thrones, she's like, oh, I don't belong in the North. These trees still scare me. And she feels so alien in the North. And now she's like the most Northern person that you almost can get in this book. And I just love seeing how much she's changed over just 3 books. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, interesting. About the guest rights, though, man, later on in the book, from Bran's perspective, when we get that story about why you don't break the that the people who do that are cursed forever, basically.
Yeah,
I love that because, man, I got so mad at the phrase.
Don't other people in the same book? Isn't there someone else that's asking for guest rights before in another chapter? Where they explain like I feel like
it's for Joffrey's.
I don't
remember.
I don't remember.
I felt like there was someone.
It is like it is like in a world where honor's constantly challenged and people are constantly saying one thing and doing another. It does feel like that's the major type of protection that people rely on is like, okay, well, at least you have guests, right? Like, at least no matter how bad it gets, you can go to a wedding. And it's just like, no,
not in Westeros, you can't.
And then later on, doesn't like Tyrion challenges Tywin about it and says that's horrible that this wasn't honored. And Tywin's something like, well, why is it more honorable to kill a bunch of dudes on the field than it is at dinner? Like it's just math to him, which I think is crazy good. So
yeah, the fallout between that discussion between Tywin and Tyrion after he finds out, and Joffrey's just laughing like, "Oh, he killed him." It's just like so good. Like that scene is so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know. I agree. Like everything was setting it up so clearly that something terrible is going to happen. Every time they like met up with people from like some of the Frey kids who were coming to represent them, they were always angry and they didn't want to be there, and they were like, kind of snarky the entire time, and you're just like, okay, this is just not come on.
He made
like,
Black Walder front and center, and that was not an accident. Like that,
yes,
that is a dark dude that has done some terrible stuff. So
yeah. The one big thing, there's a couple of things, but the one thing that big thing that does shift between this and the show for the Red Wedding, that we can like kind of move on, but is the fact that Jane Westerling doesn't go to the wedding, and Jane Westerling survives. Did you like that? Do you like that? Like, do you think that's a better execution of what it is? And did you think how it's done in the show where they just bring, I forget her name.
It's a different character entirely, right? Like a field surgeon.
Yeah. They bring her, and she's pregnant to the Red Wedding.
She's like a field surgeon from this, if I remember correctly. Yeah. I think it's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. You first.
No, thanks. I think it's better this way because we know the Westerlings are bannermen to the Lannisters. And I think there's a very good chance they were part of the deal. Maybe not Jane herself, but certainly the mother to sort of step back from that army and step towards the Lannister group. So I think that's what happened here. And I think that's, why she wasn't there. And I think that was I understand why they made the change in the show, mostly for shock value to see a pregnant woman getting stabbed in the stomach, but which was awful, obviously.
Oh my God.
But no, I like this better with her not being involved and the Westerlings not being involved because they have that allegiance to the Lannister. They have to step back.
A lot more gray area of what's going on.
Yep.
Yeah. For me, I agree. I think that and that's such a good point because I mean, Grey Wind not trusting the Westerlings, especially those who aren't Jane, like that. That makes a lot of sense to me, Scott. I just want to say that. But as far as, but also, I mean, after the Red Wedding scene, after all that's cleared out, the Westerlings, they pay fealty. It's said somewhere in the text that they pay fealty to the Lannisters, to the Iron Throne. So I've always, like when I read the series the first time, I remember just wanting so badly to know what happened to Jane. And also wondering back then, I think this time I'm a little more skeptical this was the case. But as a first time reader, I remember thinking, What if he got her pregnant and she doesn't know? You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know. They kept saying that she wasn't pregnant, but I don't know.
They'll probably give her moon tea, and they'll probably marry her off to someone that's going to be loyal to the Lannisters, I would imagine.
But wouldn't the Lannisters want that heir? I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't.
I don't think so. I don't think you would want any tie to the... maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think you would want any potential tie to Starks. I would say don't get pregnant for another couple of years to make sure that there's no confusion. That's what I would think Ty and company would do.
But why wouldn't they just kill off Sansa if that were the case?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. With Sansa, they still have a tie to Winterfell potentially. Tyrion marrying her secures him as
but I mean, by that theory, then Jane's heir, then Rob's heir would definitely also give them Winterfell.
Yeah.
I don't know. I read too much fantasy, I guess.
No,
Risings are always
I'm asking
problem.
because it was always kind of confusing to me. I'm like, why would you need Sansa necessarily for Winterfell? And this might be my dumbness, so I apologize. I
don't think it's
because
dumb.
It's like, why couldn't you just like win it by conquest? Like,
yeah, I don't think it's dumb. I think there's a difference, though. I think it wasn't Sansa that went to war with the Lannister host. It was Robb. So I think there's a difference there. And it wasn't Sansa that, was proclaimed king. It was Robb. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a difference there in their lineages, but I could be wrong.
No. Yeah, I guess what I'm just saying is like, why does it have to be Stark at Winterfell? Like, why couldn't you, if you obliterate all the Starks, just take Winterfell by conquest, is what I'm saying.
That probably could happen, yeah.
Probably would have been pretty easy to do at this point, honestly.
Theon tried. So, yeah.
But I like it. I like that it's set up the way it is. If it had to be that way, I love it. I'm not saying it should be changed. It was just a question that came up in my head.
No, yeah.
Well, the other thing that's connected directly to the Red Wedding is the fact that Arya almost gets there. Mm-hmm. Arya's with the Hound, and she almost just barely misses the Red Wedding.
I know.
While it's going on. But, yeah, I feel like that's Arya's curse, is to constantly be a foot away from something big going on with another character in the book, and we're seeing it from her perspective.
I remember,
but Arya.
Sorry, I was going to just really quickly say, as a first-time reader, I remember when the Hound gets the axe, gives her the axe blow to the head.
Yes.
I thought that she was dead. I really thought she was dead at that moment. I'm like, oh my! You're just
like, what else is off limit? Nothing's off limits.
Sorry,
she's done. I was just going to say that, like, Arya's storyline in this book is, I don't know if it's not that it's not my favorite. I just feel like it's not, compared to everything else that's going on in this book, it's not like the one I'm the most excited for, but I do enjoy her chapters. And I think that especially this perspective, seeing this from the other side, and, the Hound on the way to it saying, hey, we got to take you to your uncle's bloody wedding. And you're just like, such an on the nose statement to like what's actually going to happen.
Yep.
Yes.
And then, it's just like, it's really well done, super on the nose, but like on a reread, it's very funny.
Yes.
And sad, but funny. But like everything else that they run into along the way. So like the Brotherhood without banners and Beric Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr, that whole thing is really cool. We do see resurrection, like officially for I don't know if I can't remember it's the first time. Not really the first time, but this world is definitely a fantasy world. Like, so despite the fact that this is, we're not like Stormlight or something when it comes to the level of fantasy that exists within this world, there's very much magic that exists here. And so, like, in addition to just dragons, we have people resurrecting each other multiple times from like Beric Dondarrion's doing. So I don't know. I really enjoyed that, like seeing some of those things, and just how her story ties many different POVs that we're seeing elsewhere throughout the book together. And she's kind of like a connector, an overlap almost in a bunch of different characters' POVs as she progresses.
She's kind of hurt with her interactions with, is it Hallen, I think, who was, worked for her dad and stuff. And he has to remind her, this is my brotherhood now. These are the people that I love. allied with. It's not the Stark family that I have an allegiance to. It's this group of individuals, and that seems to hit her pretty hard. Yeah, that whole sequence is good. The thing I like about magic in this series, it's completely separate from something like a Sanderson hard magic system. We don't know what the rules are. I don't think George knows what the rules are. I think he's making it up as he goes, which I like. So that's good.
I get to. Nothing's off limits.
Yeah,
I love it.
Something I love about Arya's chapters is that the closer she gets to being with her family, you have this hope, you're like, yay, she's gonna be reunited. This is gonna be so great. You're just so looking forward to that moment, and then, well, what happens, and you're like, wow, George is he's out to kill us, like with heart attacks and pain and stuff, because it's like you have so much anticipation, so much hope, and then it just gets crushed. And on the one hand, you're so happy she never made it, and on the other hand, you're like, but like, what's gonna happen now? So
no, that conflict. And I mean, I also love in Arya's chapters too, how leading up to the wedding, how she has anxiety about seeing her mom again, knowing like she's killed all these people. And I wanted to ask you all about Jon's mother that comes up in her chapters, in Arya's chapters, how she, do you think, I didn't write down the names. Sorry. Scott, you've read this so many times. What do you think is happening there? And do you think it's reliable?
Ashara Dane, right? That's the belief, I think, Arthur Dane's sister. Which I think is a possibility, but I think most of us believe it's I don't know. I probably shouldn't say it because it's a show spoiler and stuff, but I think most of us have come to grips with who we think his real parents are, but I won't spoil that here.
But I want to know. Darn it.
We can type it in the private chat.
I mean,
R plus.
I'm happy to say.
I'd say we.
I'll type it for you in the private chat.
Well, we don't have to say if it's confirmed in the show. We can just say that it's like a big theory in the show.
Fair.
That's okay. Yes, some that you dropped in the private chat.
We'll stage it that way.
Yeah. That's always been my theory, at least with the mother. But anyway, no, it's interesting because it's just interesting. And plus the Sword of the Morning. That's a character we never meet. Does he come up in any of the other books, like in outside of A Song of Ice and Fire, like in Dunk and Egg or Fire and Blood?
Only I don't even think he's referenced at all in Dunk and Egg, and it would have been long before his time in Fire and Ice. So he's like this mythical character, right? And probably why I like him so much, because we only know glimpses of who he was and what he was. He was, in many people's eyes, the greatest knight of his generation, maybe the greatest knight that ever lived. And this sword is unique in the world because it's from a fallen star, not from Valyrian steel, which is really cool as well. It's a part of the world in an area that I want to know more about, but we don't have much about right now. We know that Ned was there. We know there was probably some kind of relationship with the sister, but beyond that, we don't really know too much. And based on, I think, who I and most people believe Jon's parents to be, that's the person they think, this Ashara, that's not his mother. So,
okay. And it's interesting about Arthur Dane, because that's the one that Jaime talks about extensively in this book as well. He looked up to him so much. I think he was the one who knighted him. I could be wrong about that.
It was either him or the White Bull. I can't remember which of the two, the Lord Commander at the time. But it was his great honor to serve next to Arthur Dane in that same Kingsguard, which was cool. It's also one of Bran's favorite knights, maybe his favorite, because he has the stories from his dad about Arthur Dane as well.
Something I really liked in Arya's chapter 2 is that we see the ghost of Highheart, and then you have all those prophecies coming out, and it's just so cool.
We also get some we get warging essentially from Arya. It's like I had a dream I was a wolf and I saw my mom's body. It's like
the wolf dreams are so cool.
So cool. It's that's something they didn't like outside of Bran. They didn't really, explore that in the show. But I love that it's like way deeper in the books.
I love that the warging is explored in those two perspectives, especially. I mean, does it happen with Jon too?
A little bit, I think.
Tiny bit.
I think he and Ghost definitely have that kind of connection. So I think there's a little bit of it.
Yeah, I love it with specifically though with Arya and Bran though, because those are two characters. Like, if you think about their personal, I feel like every character in this series that we follow has an internal conflict with identity, and with Arya specifically, it's like she's conflicted with embraces feeling like a wolf, and that she's a killer, and then on the other hand, she feels like an imposter, and can I even go back to being with my mom again and my family? Will they accept me? And maybe I'm just a little girl. Maybe I'm just, she's constantly also feeling weak and feeble. And being a wolf kind of gives her that empowerment. It gives her her full identity that she wants to be. I think the full heroic sense of self that she wants to aspire towards. I'm sure there's some Jungian phrase for this, but I'm not failing to remember. But the same thing with Bran, because Bran is in such a, he always dreamed of being a knight. He didn't want to be a prince, and prince of what when Winterfell's no more. But, it's like he's also vulnerable in the sense that he doesn't have his full capacities, and he wants to run and jump and play and do all these things and be active. And through warging, he's able to do that. So I feel like it's kind of neat that warging is explored through those couple of characters, even though obviously there seems to be some dangers involved in warging too.
Yeah, I think there could get to be a point where you go too far into and you become the animal, basically. I think is the biggest danger.
And you have all the warging also with the eagle and stuff, like in Jon's perspective when we hear from all of those. So you hear a lot about warging in this book. So I really like that.
For sure.
Yeah. Some major consequences with the magic, which I like,
Yes. And you forget sometimes that it is a magical fantasy world, except for dragons and wolves, and then this kind of stuff, I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh, the others.
Oh, right. Oh yeah, them.
Oh yeah, them.
Who are they?
Who are those guys?
Arya also at the end of this book calls Valar Morghulis.
Yeah.
I love that ending for her.
That progression. Yeah.
Valar Duharis.
Valar Duharis.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so awesome.
Yeah.
Do they take her coin? Do you remember? Or is it just they take her coin from her?
They take her coin for passage. Yep.
For passage, yeah.
And that's where she's heading. All right. Well, I think from there, I'm trying to think the best way. I guess because we were talking about Catelyn letting go of Jaime, let's just start talking about Jaime, because I think out of all the characters in this book, he's probably my favorite. I think he has the most tremendous change of any character, but also this is one of two new POVs that we get in this book. We get Jaime's POV. And so that adds a lot of, new insight into who his character is at a more internal level. And there's a lot of scenes in this book where we get just huge explanations of backstory of kind of his reasoning for different things. And one of the ones that sticks out to me every single time I read this book is the one where he's having discussion with Brienne of Tarth, and he's explaining why he killed the Mad King, and everyone always calls him the Kingslayer. And essentially the Mad King, found out that all these people were betraying him. And so he was going to burn the city down because he didn't want he was like, I'm going to burn the city down before anyone else comes to take it from me. And then he orders Jaime to kill his dad. And Jaime's like, I'm not going to do that. And so he does that. And I just think that entire conversation is so good. Like that, and the one that he has with Catelyn, obviously in the Clash of Kings at the way end, are both huge gateways into kind of seeing what he's actually thinking outside of the more pompous knight persona that he might give off in the first book and a half.
Yeah, he was the hero of Westeros.
Yep.
He was the unacknowledged hero of Westeros.
Because once again, you go back to, do you kill the king to save the many, or do you let the Aerys burn the whole city down, and then at least you're not a Kingslayer? So,
and then you're honorable. And I just think constantly about the amount of trauma he must have gone through watching Aerys with the trials, watching people burn alive right in front of him in this really sadistic way.
Yeah.
I really love that we get his point of view because I think it's easy from the outside. Everybody, sees him as an oath breaker and he didn't do what he was supposed to do. And he's 100% correct. You can't keep all of the oaths that you're sworn to uphold. So you have to kind of pick and choose. It's not quite as simple as do what the king says. So yeah, I love all that stuff. It's fantastically written.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you can go.
I was thinking when I was trying to think of like the archetype earlier that he plays with Catelyn in that scene in Clash of Kings. I don't know if there's a better. I'm sure there's a better term for this, but I keep thinking of like Othello and Iago, and how Iago is always twisting Othello's better sense of judgment around to see the darker side of things and to make him trigger all of his like ill virtues or ill qualities such as like jealousy. And so I feel like he does that on Catelyn, and he kind of works it on the reader too. I feel like he's a very persuasive character, and he's very cunning. He's very intelligent. I like how like when he's with Brienne, how when the archers are attacking them, he goes full force at them because he knows long distance fighters don't stand a chance in melee, like things like that.
Yeah. His relationship with Brienne and that progression is so good.
Yeah.
Like
It's
going
brilliant.
from the classic banter at the beginning of the book to giving him the sword that at the end of the book is just and sending her to go find the rest of these Starks. Yeah. It was just.
I love that the sword he named Oathkeeper. That was really cool.
I know that. I mean,
that whole scene with him reading the white book and stuff, and then him deciding his own destiny, kind of. I love that for him so much.
His interaction
like,
with Loras is really cool. Where he's like, "This green boy, this is me." I really like that. That's really.
I love that too, and I love that. Like he looks at Loras, and I feel like when he looks at Loras, it's interesting because it's almost humbling in a way. But at the same time, it's also like, look how dumb I was to believe in what I believed in back then. But at the same time, I think one thing that doesn't seem to ever die in Jaime, despite everything he's gone through, I feel like there was something special about the fact that he did hold the White Book so reverent. Like he really looked up to Arthur Dane and all of those other knights. Those were his heroes. And he didn't want them, they were important to him. They're still important to him.
Selmy too. And it's funny that he makes Selmy like writing out his own. I was excommunicated or whatever and sent away. Like he took the time to go back and write his own afterword to his story, which is funny.
I thought that was funny too. I'm like, when did he find the time to do that? There was no time in the story to do it. How did he? Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah. And it's after he gets his hand cut off, that's like the beginning of a huge character shift for him because, his entire identity is, for a lot of it, is wrapped up into being the head of the Kingsguard, being in the Kingsguard.
The best sword in the realm, invincible.
Best sword in the realm, yeah. And so that really, it changes everything. And then especially when he gets back and Tywin's like, just go to Cashley Rock and like go there. You don't have to be here. And he's like, I want to be here. I want to serve in the Kingsguard. And he's like, even with a one hand essentially. And I don't know. I just think Jaime's character in this book progression is just so well done. And Joanna, you brought it up earlier, but the scene where he goes back and jumps into the bear pit to save Brienne and like stop that whole thing is phenomenal. And just it's like the most on the nose expression of how his character has changed. Like I think up to that point we've seen glimpses of it and like how he cares for Brienne and like how where his loyalties lie at this point of his life and like with all the other situations that are going on. But that is a true moment of being like, screw it. I need to this is not right. I need to save her.
Yeah, even though he looks at Loras as being like a younger self version of him, I feel like Brienne mirrors back his old virtues. Yeah. He can't help but deny it. And so she brings out his conscience when he's having that dream, that nightmare that causes him to go back to save her. Which is also a very calculating decision, by the way, to jump in a bear pit without a hand. banking
I
on the
know.
fact they're going to save you because you're a Lannister.
Classic Lannister.
But I really love, and I know I've mentioned that in the video, but I really love how they both listen to each other. Even though they're kind of hard on each other, they do take in what each other says at the end of the day, especially with what they go through together and how she basically tells him, don't be craven. You need to live, at least live to get vengeance on your enemies. And he's like, yes, I need to live. I need to live for Cersei needs me and my little brother who loves me for a lie. And, and he says, and for my enemies, a Lannister must pay his debts. It's just like.
So good.
It's so good. I mean, it just, dang it. Jaime Lannister. He is my favorite. I almost went back and forth because I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the trial scene, the whole Tyrion, I'm guilty. I confesses of being guilty of being a dwarf. Like that one, that also just like blew my mind again.
That entire speech is awesome. He's like, I wish I would have killed Joffrey. Like, I want your smug
Simon says you're not on trial for being a dwarf, and he said on the contrary, I've been on trial for being a dwarf my whole life.
My entire life.
Good.
Yeah.
So good.
So do you all know what physiognomy is? Physiognomy?
No.
It's basically when we have prejudices on people, we attribute virtues with physical characteristics.
Okay.
Got it.
So if somebody has warts, or like the way that the wicked stepsister is described in Cinderella versus Cinderella herself, like it's like in fairy tales especially, we see it like the people who have the not so aesthetic characteristics being evil and bad, and the people who are good and virtuous being like really beautiful and perfect looking. And we have a whole history of that in our culture and with fairy tales and stories. And I feel like Martin, especially with Tyrion Lannister, is the best like exploration of physiognomy that you could possibly see, because he basically is saying, you all have made me the monster. Like he was self-created as a monster because of the ways he's been treated his whole life. There's an opera by Mussorgsky called Boris Godunov. And I'm not remembering all the details of the opera. I studied it many years ago, but I just remember the basic premise of this man who is condemned for being a monster his whole life. And he's not really a monster, but he becomes the monster because society has decided that's what he is. And I feel like I just love that about Tyrion's character. I just love that.
Yeah. I have it like, I have the whole speech right here, but at the way end of it, he's like, I did not do it, yet now I wish I had. I wish I had enough poison for you all. You make me sorry that I am not the monster you would have me be, yet there it is. I am innocent, but I will get no justice here. You leave me no choice but to appeal to the gods, and I demand trial by battle.
Yeah.
So, it's just...
And I love that Martell takes up the arms. That Martell was mountain battle as well.
Oh, Brent. Oh, my God.
Ever.
Yeah.
I wanted Martell to win. Dang it.
Oh, no. Oh, you think he does for a second. You're like, he's got him.
We're good to go. And then
let's talk about Tyrion. So Tyrion in this book gets, like pretty early on, I believe, gets told that he has to marry Sansa, and does marry Sansa. And at the same time, like Joffrey's planning to marry Marjorie.
Right.
So one of the big like internal struggles with the marriage of Sansa and Tyrion is the fact that Tywin is telling Tyrion, oh, you need to consummate this marriage. Tyrion's like, internally, he's like, we need to do it. Like, I know that this is something we need to do. This is part of the marriage. And he like kind of, Tyrion does kind of want to do it as well. But at the same time, he never forces it. And he never in this book takes it to like make Sansa, live up to her values or what she's required, what they believe is required to do if you're a wife in King's Landing right now. What did you think of this entire situation when it comes to how Tyrion handles it, how he handles his father, and even, I mean, the wedding itself, when they make Sansa kneel so he could put the thing over her head, and everyone's just laughing and Joffrey's laughing, and it's just really embarrassed, like all out to embarrass Tyrion to the fullest extent.
kind of shows the difference between Tywin and Tyrion. There's obviously several differences, but I'm paraphrasing. Tyrion is like, well, why would she have me? And Tywin's sort of like, well, what difference does that make? Like, it's just, that's the mentality that he has. So, and I love that Tyrion is like, well, wait until you're ready. And she said, what if I'm never ready? And he's like, well, that's what whores are for, I guess. So, like, that's just Tyrion being Tyrion. I love it.
Yeah. And he constantly stands up to his dad will like keeps checking in. He's just not afraid to stand up to it, which I have always liked too. He's like never afraid to stand up to Tywin, despite the fact that Tywin, like, he knows it's pretty clear how Tywin views Tyrion in terms of being a Lannister.
And you would think that in his position, he would do anything to get back into Tywin's good graces, because he's always been the ugly little duckling of the family. And here he has like the opportunity to kind of be like, right. I could redeem myself in my father's eyes, but he doesn't do it. And I love seeing that his own honor is bigger than that. And that he respects her, because he could have just forced her, especially her being a Stark and everything. It would have been perfect. He's like, yep, I get Winterfell. Amazing. This is great. Winterfell is so big too. And yet he doesn't. And I really love that about him.
Yeah. Tyrion, I know I kind of jumping around, but just continue with Tyrion because we go back to like the purple wedding and stuff. But Tyrion, when he's waiting for his trial and he's like in the prison, has a bunch of conversations with Jaime comes, also Varys comes a few times. He finds out that the girl that he married and that he was forced to marry, and then Tywin said, oh, she's a whore that I paid for or whatever, and then like did that terrible thing with her. Finds out that she wasn't a prostitute to begin with, and it was just actually someone who really really loved Tyrion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crushing. And then even finding out like Tywin comes in and is like, I'll make a deal. Basically, they say like, oh, we're going to make a deal with you, Tyrion. If you just confess, then we're going to send you to the Night's Watch and you'll be there to live your days, but we won't be killing you. And then Shay shows up, but I don't know.
Well,
Tyrion has a number of amazing scenes in this book.
I mean, I saw Shay is planted by Cersei, but one thing that I questioned in this story, I know this is probably this is going to be my most controversial opinion ever on Song of Ice and Fire. But I do wonder sometimes, even though I think he's a horrible person, don't get me wrong, I do wonder sometimes if Tywin is not as evil as people make him out to be. And if there was a part of him that actually did deep down care about Tyrion and did care about Jaime too. I know he's a toxic parent. I'm not trying to say he's not. But I think there was that line. I think it's because partly there were two things that made me question it. One is that, I don't know. He might not be a very morally great character. He might be much more on the dark end. However, there was the scene where where Jaime is confronting his dad, Tywin, because I think Tywin knows. I think Tywin knows that Cersei and Jaime are having. I think he knows.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think he knows how his grandchildren were born. But he's not saying anything. And when Jaime says he doesn't want to take Casterly Rock, I think he knows why Jaime's what Jaime's motivation is to stay close to Cersei.
Yep.
I don't think that's all of Jaime's motivation, by the way, anymore. But I mean, I think that is at least a huge part of it still. And like when he says, you're not my son, go do your duty. I felt pain in that. And I also, later on in that cell scene with Kevin Lannister, with his brother, that's when Kevin Lannister is saying, you don't know your father like I do. He actually really cares about you.
Right.
Confess, take the black. I mean, what does he have to lose by telling him to do that? Like, they would kill him otherwise. Why would he want him to live? Like, I think there still is, I can't help but think that there's still part of him that cares. Like, I know that's very controversial, but
I don't think it is. I was going to mention that we see a little bit of him through Kevin's eyes, and Tyrion's like, you love him. He's my brother. Like, there's a certain amount of reverence that Kevin has for his brother. And good, bad, or otherwise, Tywin places House Lannister above all other concerns. And he's got his way of doing things. This is how he wants it. And it makes it seem like he doesn't care about any of his kids or anything else. But I think you're right. I think deep down there is at least some amount of love, even if it's just this is what my wife, who was the one joy in Tywin's life, left me with. So I don't think that's controversial.
Zin brought up. It is interesting to think about what sort of person Tywin would it be if
that's a great point.
Died. Yeah.
I was hoping Zin would drop in. We mentioned the others earlier. He's going to mention how he hates that storyline. So look forward to that.
I totally agree. I think Tywin is extremely calculating and is probably, it always seems like he's a few steps ahead of a lot of other people in this series. But I don't think that totally negates the fact that he probably still does. Like, despite the fact that on an hour appearance, he definitely trashes Tyrion to his face and like tells him, "Oh, you're not worthy of the Lannister name," and all this stuff. He still thinks of him. I'm just saying, I'm not going to claim it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he still deep down thinks of Tyrion as like, "You are my son, somewhat. You are a Lannister, as much as it can mean to be a Lannister," and so I do care about you as much as I can, but there was a whole bunch of external factors and just the fact that he still blames the death of his wife on Tyrion.
Yep.
Same with Cersei.
Yep.
That, it overshadows a lot of it as well.
He still trusts Tyrion a little bit too. I mean, he lets him in on council. He tells him about how none of the suitors he wanted to put with Catelyn wanted to marry Catelyn.
And he made him acting hand of the kingdom.
Yeah,
he didn't have to do that. He could have put someone. He could have put Kevin or anybody else in place. He chose Tyrion.
So something I really loved. There was a line at some point in the book, and I know I highlighted it in my ebook because I read this on ebook, and I failed to bring it up before this discussion. But there was a particular line about the way that so much of what we do in our lives is shaped by, at least in the characters' perspectives, is shaped by their parents. How everything is put into play by those that went before them. And so Tywin was responding to everything he did in life. Every calculation he made was in response to his parents. He was wanting to bring honor back to House Lannister. And now his kids feel like the playthings of him and his, and his design. And so I feel like it's just an interesting perspective that I think George R.R. Martin is exploring, is how so many of these kids are, how they're put in the positions they are because of their parents in the first place.
Yeah. Zin says, I feel like he'd become more appreciative of Tyrion when he realized what dumbasses his other children were. I slightly agree with that. I also agree with when he sees that Jaime's lost a hand. Cersei is, her situation has slightly changed. Kind of a bunch of stuff is happening, especially after Joffrey dies. Then the whole Lannister situation in general is kind of shifted. And so I do think he becomes a little bit more outwardly appreciative of Tyrion in those moments. It's like, look, I, take the black. But at the end of the day, when he does say demand by trial by combat and Oberyn dies, that his dad still is like, this is what happens. You just it's your time to die. But
I also think there weren't many people more happy about Joffrey's death than Tywin. He's like, well, we got the malleable son now. We'll put somebody in the king that I can do stuff with.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point.
Like at the wedding when they present Joffrey with the sword, or they present Joffrey with the sword, and Joffrey's just like playing with it and saying like,
cuts this book.
Cuts the book, and Tywin's like, what the hell? You just
there are many parts of the story that make me furious, but him cutting up that priceless book is probably the one that makes me just rage. Every single time I read it. There's like 4 copies in the world, and he's just treating it like nothing.
And you go back to what you were saying, Joanna, about Dany, how she's like, oh, I read this in a book. Like how valuable it can be to actually read, in this world as well. And then he's like, oh, just kidding. He's such an idiot. Like the second he dies, like, oh, yes. I think it's one of the most satisfactory TV and book moments I've ever had in my entire life. Seeing him die. I was just like, yes.
I just like, because Tyrion clearly values literature and things that are written and reading and stuff. And so like that entire attack on the book is just a direct attack on things that Tyrion holds very high, and right in front of him. So that is very tough. But it is interesting because I think if you ever watch like a interview with George R.R. Martin or anything about his writing process in this book, he's like, I skipped the Red Wedding. He wrote everything to the Red Wedding, skipped the Red Wedding, wrote it the very last. It was the last thing he wrote for this book. And then he just said, went on to write all the fun stuff because he said like the Joffrey's death was just like one of the best scenes he had written.
That sounds like George.
And it was very interesting because he also talks about like in that moment when Joffrey's dying, he does try to make Cersei see, you want to empathize with Cersei of like, her son's dying and she's freaking out and there's nothing that she can do because Joffrey's just turning purple like on the ground. And he was talking like in an interview I was watching about how he made a point of writing it that way. So you do see the mother's perspective, like not directly, but you do see that even in this moment of this despicable person that we all have grown to just absolutely hate, you may still slightly empathize with or sympathize with Cersei in that moment. But
I think we've talked about it before.
I didn't,
right?
but
we've talked about it before, I think. But whatever you feel about Cersei, you can't deny it. She loves her children.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
A good mother, in some respects. I don't like some of the things she does as a mother, but you can't deny she loves her children and wants what's best for them. So that is a little heartrending. Even as I'm cheering privately that Ding Dong Joffrey's dead is a good time. So
yeah.
I still can't believe the scene where Jaime and Cersei basically make love at the funeral of their son.
Yeah.
This is so wild.
Yep.
That happened, didn't it? Wow.
Yeah, it did.
And it's like we don't really get a lot of Sansa. I mean, her storyline in this book is just kind of continuously sad, but
except that we get like the answer to who started this whole thing in the beginning.
Yes, we do.
And that's so crazy when you really are like, so it was Lysa and Littlefinger. Oh, like what?
Yeah.
Just so
I really like her scenes with Littlefinger. That stuff's all
her scenes with Littlefinger is really good. There's also a scene with Dantos, I believe his name is, where she's talking about the Tyrells and how like, the Tyrells are better than the Lannisters. He's just like, the Tyrells are just Lannisters with flowers.
Yeah,
really
I love that line.
Starts putting into perspective that like all of these people are after the same things from a different angle and with different disguises on. You can't trust anyone. Get out of here. It's just like And now they all think that you killed Joffrey. So at least had some hand in it.
She's always been a pawn piece. She's never been able to be a player in that game. Never. I think it was really intelligent the way we got to know the Tyrells through Sansa's perspective. The way that I loved those scenes. I thought that was so, I don't know, it just added so much richness to everything. And like when they're asking her about Tyrion and her conflict, it's not Tyrion, Joffrey. And they're asking her about Joffrey.
Yeah.
And the conflict she feels, the trauma she feels, the fear she feels of saying anything. It just felt so intense. I will say that my favorite scenes with Sansa, though, were at the Eyrie, like at the end.
Oh yeah,
the snow castle, the imagery in those scenes, like with the snow and the way she almost feels like a kid again, but I have nobody to throw snowballs to, and little John Arryn is just a little brat, and he comes and stomps all over her Winterfell, and then when Littlefinger kisses her, and then her aunt thinks that she kissed him, and it's there was so much beautiful imagery leading up to when Littlefinger pushes Tully out the moon door. There was so much beautiful imagery.
So good.
I know. I've only loved one woman.
Yeah. I love that. I love that line too. Dang it. The dialogue is so perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting just how beautiful everything was leading up to that scene too, when Sansa's walking towards that place. It's so breathtaking. Like, and it seems so pure. And I feel like a lot of the snow imagery and the perfect white imagery, a lot of it just to me kind of reflected Sansa's purity. and then everything, of course, goes chaotic and dark. But I think it was like there was another author I was talking to who was very influenced by A Song of Ice and Fire, and he was talking about how amazing it is, how like the grim, when you talk about grim dark, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it, dark fantasy, but like the way that George R.R. Martin is able to give you the beautiful, just some of the most beautiful settings you could possibly imagine, and juxtapose it with some of the most horrific, violent, vile things.
I love the stuff with Littlefinger because he's starting to teach her how to play the Game of Thrones from the shadows. He talks about when people don't know what you want, you can kind of confuse them and lead them in weird directions, and they don't know who the invisible hand is at play and all this. I love all that stuff. It's so good.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Like just learning to figure out people's motivations and what people really want in order to manipulate them.
Yeah.
And then having her create this whole new identity. I don't know. That was fascinating.
Really puts in perspective who holds power. In a world where everyone's so obsessed with it.
Fighting for power,
Okay. I think at this point we haven't really touched on Stannis, Melisandre, Davos. We haven't touched on
Bran.
The
We haven't
North.
talked about Bran either.
Bran,
Oh, the North,
Bran, North. We'll talk about that. So let's talk about Jon Snow and Ygritte. And the prologue, which the prologue is Chet, right? Chet and the
preparing to desert and take out more
yes. And then they hear the horns, and it's like one horn is signals
friends.
Other knights friends, 2 is wildlings, and 3 is the others, and then it blows 3 times. Awesome prologue, by the way. I don't know if it's my favorite of the 3. It's probably my second favorite.
Clash
I really enjoyed it. Clash of Kings is so good.
It just doesn't hold a candle to the Clash of Kings prologue, but it's still pretty good.
It's really good. And I think from that point on, the North is just such an interesting storyline in this book because you're getting it from 2 perspectives. Now we're getting it from Samwell, who is a new POV, and we're getting it from Jon, who's off with the wildlings for a lot of it.
And Bran.
And Bran, who is now very much in the North, and is also like Arya crossing paths with some other characters. Cross paths with Sam and Gilly in this book for a moment, which is a really cool scene. And you're just also kind of frustrating because you're just like, you're so close to your brother, but because also isn't Jon like right there too, like right before that? Is that where Jon escapes? He like fights, he escapes from Ygritte, and it's not like right outside.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're
the
very
North
close to each other,
but they're within a few leagues anyway. I think it's relatively close.
Yeah,
because I feel like Bran is looking outside the window and is seeing people like out there fighting or whatever, and you're also getting Jon's storyline at the same time. That's they're struggling, and he's escaping now from the wildlings who he helped cross the.
I mean, isn't it the case that when they're in the tower, Bran, when Bran and Joran and Mira
Hodor
are in the tower?
Mira.
Mira are in the tower, and from a distance he sees a figure. They see a figure that is coming and starting a fire or something, and I think that's the same figure that Jon and Ygritte come across. The one that Ygritte's like, kill him, like to prove yourself. And he won't do it, and Ygritte does, and just completely stains in a way that relationship.
Yeah.
Then he gets
so what do you
away.
guys think of Ygritte and Jon and their relationship in this book?
I like it. It's very understandable. They're the same age. They're the circumstances are obviously different for how they live their lives, but it makes sense to me that she kind of stood up for him and brought him into Mance's world, and I like the relationship. It's good.
It's very interesting to see. It's very interesting to see how conflicted Jon is with how he feels about Ygritte, and also his vows to the Night's Watch. And
Indeed.
Yeah, he's completely lost. He doesn't know what honor is anymore. He doesn't know. He just there's no direction beyond the wall. It's interesting because it feels like it has almost symbolic meaning to him. as far as his moral compass, it's just completely gone.
Mhm.
But I did love their relationship. I love how complicated it was, and
Mhm.
the way, even just the little things he described about her, like her slightly crooked teeth, and the fact that like when she was wearing all those furs that you can't really tell how big or small she really was, and the way she'd smile at him, he'd look over and she'd be smiling at him all the time. I love that. And I love, by the way, like when I think about, there's just so many details to the world building. I mean, even in Westeros, like the customs of weddings and beddings and everything. Like I think it's all so detailed. It's so
Yeah.
interesting. And it's kind of like our world, but different. And but I also love the way he built the community with the wildlings, like the little details. When he got beyond there, they weren't all barbarians in his mind. Surprise. There were women with babies, and there were oxen and sheep, and there were people dancing and people playing music and fires. And, it's just like there's a whole culture there. There's a whole rich culture there. And it just felt like I loved that. I loved that there was so much attention to that in the world building.
And Mance being the one playing the music and stuff when he
Yes.
thought someone else was going to be Mance, and you're like, no, the king, that's him. So yeah, I really like that.
And how he was like,
That's
I
funny.
was there back then.
Yes.
Book 1. I asked somebody, I think in the Discord, I'm like, did we actually see Mance in book 1 without realizing it? And somebody, I think Kyle or somebody said, no, not really. But
Yeah.
it was just fascinating.
Yeah.
So big.
I don't think so. He talks obviously about having traveled to Winterfell, but
Yeah.
there's no point I remember where that could have been Mance.
It would be cool, but
Yeah.
It
It
would
was interesting. Go ahead.
Wait, I'll type it out in the private chat because I don't want to, spoil anyone. But especially given a certain theory, and I don't know how to spell. So if you think about this theory and you take that into account with what everything we hear,
I've seen that theory.
So then it's like it's actually super interesting, and then you're like, oh, okay.
I had not heard that theory.
I
I don't know.
I don't prescribe to that one, but I like
me
it.
neither. But like this time on a reread, I was like looking out for clues. I was like, oh, okay, you could have some things
For sure. Yeah.
And I love Nothing Jon Snow. I just love that recurring line over and over again.
Oh my god, yeah.
Did you know? Like I had no idea she died in this book, and then when she died, I was like, wait, what?
I know it does come like the whole siege, the Battle of the Wall, essentially, kind of came faster than I expected. I also don't, I think this is the one type of situation where I do prefer maybe the television show, just for like an instance like this where you do have like a big action event or something. I don't think a huge action event like that is George's strong suit, and not in a bad way. I just don't even think he wants to write that. I think he's outwardly said he doesn't like writing those scenes.
He's very clear. He doesn't love writing battle scenes and action scenes.
Yeah. So like what makes those so impactful is kind of like the emotional investment you have in the characters building up to it and kind of the fallout from it. So that's what makes it so enjoyable. And I just remember reading that chapter and I was like, wow, this happened really fast. It was like 9 pages and I was like over and I was like, oh, okay. But
I love that sequence because he comes back, he has to win back the graces of Donald Noy and Aemon, and you got Jaina Slint there who's awful and he's trying to condemn John, and you got Alistair Thorne, they're teaming up and they're trying to condemn him, but we got thankfully Aemon and Donald Noy to see the voice of reason. And then, you got John garrisoning in the wall, and I can't remember if it's Pip or Grin, one of the two. He's like, you're in charge now. And the other one's like, him, me. Like, it's just funny to, see these guys that are not prepared for this, but they better prepare in a hurry because that's what.
So something that stood out to me in this book, because it's mentioned a couple of different times and a couple of different perspectives, was the concept of a well-disciplined group is going to be way more effective and efficient than even a bigger group that's undisciplined. Like that comes out a couple of times. And I thought there was actually a specific way it was framed that I'm failing to remember that I really just got me thinking a lot. And I thought it was interesting. I liked the part, for example, when Jon Snow is explaining that to Ygritte, she's like, we have the numbers. And he's like, it doesn't matter. You all are undisciplined. You can't. You're going to lose. And also about the wall defending itself, I thought that the way the magic is built into the wall as well was pretty incredible, pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and that
even just
sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to say the whole discipline versus undisciplined that goes a little bit back still to when they were talking about the Unsullied. What was it, 300 of them? I think echoes back to the Greek deal. There were 300 of them, and held. I can't remember if they held or they attacked the Dothraki. I think they held and garrisoned. So it goes back to that type of theme where you have one group in solidarity that knows exactly what movements they're going to do, exactly everything that's going to happen. And then the other group is just sort of attacking blindly and with no real purpose. They end up trampling over each other more than doing anything useful. And this is an even bigger deal because the Dothraki are at least trained and know what to do. This group of wildlings is just a bunch of various people that are together, randomly
brought together for. And it's like, I don't even know if they know, like how we were talking about how the people that Dany is freeing from slavery have been in this is their entire life, so they don't know anything else. So it's like even the people, the wildlings who have been raised and have been here for hundreds of years or however long it has been, it'd be hard for them to understand the cause that they might be fighting for in some instances, especially because there are a bunch of different tribes kind of being loosely brought together by Mance for this push that some people, I am sure more than just a few, want to just go back to living like their normal day, that nothing was bothering them for a while. I know it does come up a few times saying like, oh, the reason we're coming down is because we are escaping from the powers to the north, like the others are coming. And so there is that argument, which definitely comes into play when Jon's talking about how we should help the wildlings come through the wall, and they can help us defend from the others, and trying to convince all these people that like this is actually reality. So that's definitely another variable as well. But it is, there are a lot of different variables at play here. I also think the one scene of Jon and the few wildlings climbing the wall itself was so good. Like it was so tense, even though like I'm like, Jon's, nothing's gonna happen to Jon, but him and Ygritte and Tormund and all them like climbing the wall was just a great scene. Like the visual, the imagery of it, and just the watching one or two of them falling to their down. Was
more nightmare fuel for me as someone who hates heights.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the scale of it is insane.
It's one of my favorite things though, that Martin does so well, is his description of settings and his use of heights and scale. I love the way he does that. And like the fact that the wall is made mostly of ice, and so it's going to start to melt if you start to climb it. Like it's pretty logical the way that that's built in, but incredible.
What do you guys think of Stannis appearing and trying to get Jon to?
I love the way that whole thing is set up, because Davos is starting to learn to read, so he can be a better.
That's awesome. Yep.
He figures out enough to be able to suss out this is what this message is about, talks to the maester about it, and then he has to go convince Stannis and Melisandre basically, like, this is where our true place is. This is where we need to go. So you really see Davos coming into himself as Hand and saying, what are we even doing if we're not going to, fortify this against the real, villain? And Melisandre has made that point. There's the good guy and the bad guy. The others are the bad guys. So let's go be the good guy. I love that whole sequence. It's so good.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I don't know if I have much to add to that. I did enjoy Davos's chapters, and it's interesting. I know that Esme called her out because she was saying that she knocked down a whole star from this book because of Davos's chapters. And honestly, though, in full honesty and transparency, I loved this book on first read, but I do remember having a conversation with somebody and saying, I guess if I had to find something to criticize, it would be I was maybe a little less invested in Davos's chapters than other chapters. I didn't feel that way this time. This time it was very different. This time I actually found Davos's chapters far more interesting than I was expecting. Like especially the imagery at the beginning when he's in the water and he knows that his sons are at the surface or have died, have burned, and he doesn't know when he can come up. And I don't know. I just feel like there's so much like metaphor or subtext in that. even though it's like what's happening, but also like internally the internal drowning and struggle and sadness that's he's drowning in. Like it just was such powerful imagery there. And then the way he's locked in a cell after all of that, he comes back.
Know.
Yeah.
I'm biased because Davos is like a top 5 character for me in the story, and I just love him so much. So.
Yeah. I love his chapters of this book. I also love the scene where he, despite everything, helps Edric escape from being killed by Stannis and Melisandre.
Yep.
Again, the utilitarian argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because she was going to sacrifice him, right, for the magic or something.
Because it was just, I forget what that was. I think it was after Robb had died, after Joffrey had died. They were like, okay, this is your last big, take out one other person, and you're the rightful king or whatever. Yeah, just so good. I love Davos' chapters, and I love that they end up going to the north because it's almost like a new beginning. Because after this failed cause that they have fought for and failed in Clash of Kings, and kind of trying to find a new way to go about their purpose, and Melisandre too, who is, I like her more in this book because I do feel like she supports it very eagerly. She's like, yeah, this is the real threat. This is where we need to go. And so this whole new beginning of them going to the north and actually being there to help fight the others and whatever is coming from the far north is just, I don't know. A lot of people say like the first 3 books are an arc, and then everything else, book 4 or 5, and then what's to come and Winds of Winter and 4 is like another arc. And I think this is just a good example of that. I feel like a lot of stuff in this book is set up for a next stage, and this is like one of those big moments.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it, but that's actually a really good point. I love having Melisandre there at the wall.
I know, it's so cool seeing Jon.
And how she like never gets cold, and I think it's just, I don't know, it's so cool. It's so cool where he puts characters, the way he moves them around.
When you meet her, you're like, this lady's crazy, and then you realize that she's basically one of the only people that's actually realizing what we should be focusing on. And I just love how he makes you change your opinion on his characters like that,
Yeah, it's so cool though, because he takes them all the way from Dragonstone all the way to the Wall. He takes Sansa from King's Landing to the Eyrie. He takes Arya from Westeros.
All over the place.
All over the place. And so it's like, it's just so, and then of course the subverted expectation with Dany, keeping her where she is. Yeah. So I feel like, I don't know, I just love the way that he moves around people on the board. And also I want to bring up something that was brought up in the chat a lot earlier, which is Robb's wish. And I don't think we ever see this play out, but
to make Jon his heir.
Yeah, to make Jon his heir.
I saw the comment.
Yeah, I was just curious about that.
Which Catelyn obviously is very against.
Yeah. This is what she's been fighting against her whole life.
God.
Well, in some respects, I understand because if you know Westerosi history, there was a situation where Targaryens that were not Targaryens were legitimized, and it ended up being terrible for the kingdom. They were Blackfires, they were bastard sons and daughters, and they were legitimized, and that ended up putting a wrench in everything. So in some respects, I understand from a historical perspective why she's against it. We also know she's very against bastards in general, and has no love for any of them, which is not great, that bias. But in some respects, I would have liked to have seen that. Obviously Stannis has a similar desire towards the end of the book, which is cool. But we don't get any of that because we get Jon as Lord Commander, which is maybe my favorite outcome of all. So
I love how that all takes place, and they're just like, we can't. They keep voting and voting and voting, but to no avail. And Sam's just like, screw it, and starts being the power player behind the scenes and kind of manipulating the situation to get Jon elected.
Yeah. The difference in the factions is really cool too. You've got the guy from Seaguard, who's just kind of stately and an older gentleman, and then you've got basically the pirate guy, and being able to get them on the same page, basically, to both support Jon by going against each other, kind of playing the middle there. I thought was super cool how he did that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
that was clever politicking there.
Yeah.
So I think I'm trying to think of where all the characters kind of end up at the end of this book. You know, Jaime and Cersei are in King's Landing.
Mhm.
Tyrion has escaped after killing his parent, after killing Tywin and
Mhm.
Shay. Jon is Lord Commander. Dany is in Marine, I believe.
Arya's going
Catelyn
to.
comes back. What do you guys think of Catelyn coming back? Like the whole epilogue. I saw some, like in our Discord at least, I saw at least one person saying like they didn't like how it was done. They like felt too
Oh, I
kind of
love it.
heavy-handed.
I think
And
Lady
I love it.
Stark's cool, so
I agree. I thought it's awesome. It's every time I've read the book, I'm just like, this is just so good. I also
And
love
it's
how it's
nothing-
done. Doesn't say
yeah.
a word. She's just like,
Yeah.
Well, and it's perfect because, like we were saying earlier, like how she's broken down
Mhm.
Yeah.
so far, and it's been a progression of breakdown for the last couple of books.
yeah.
And so to see her in that state, she seems so evil.
I know.
And it's foreshadowed like so many times, like throughout even book one, how many
Yes.
times they talked about her being a stone heart or a heart being turned to
Mhm.
stone. And there's
Yeah.
even a scene where I think it's Arya talking to, I don't remember who, and she's like, haha, can you imagine how funny it would look, a fish in the mouth of a wolf? And it's literally this scene that it's foreshadowing. And it's like, there's so much foreshadowing for this. And so we're finally there. So I love it. I love this scene. So
Yeah.
And of
I think
course,
it's cool
the show never
because
dealt with it, but
yeah. George, like outside of A Song of Ice and Fire, is a big, like he's wrote Fever Dream, which I haven't read, which I want to
Fever
read.
Dream's great.
I want to.
Read it
Vampire
again.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
definitely want to read it. He's really into horror, and he's into sci-fi horror and astrological horror and stuff. And so I love the scenes in Song of Ice and Fire where he brings in those elements, like Lady Stoneheart, for example. And it's just the atmosphere around it is so good. And yeah, I love that the book ends with that. It's just
And it's
coolest
also
way for that book
she's
to end.
allied with the Brotherhood Without Banners. So
Yes.
she has her own little group there, and it
Yeah.
shows kind of their importance as we go along, which is super cool. Yeah.
It seems to me like, what do you think their next step is going to be? I don't remember if they come up in books 4 and 5. I just don't remember. Do they?
I was just, I've only read 4 and 5 once, so
I've never read them. It's been my first
Been a
I
while.
don't think so.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but I don't believe if they would come up, it would be in book 4, and I don't remember them doing so. We'll find out soon.
Yeah, we'll find out soon. I just know that, like, it's interesting to me, though, how just thinking again back to the story that they're telling in The Wall with Bran and Mira and Joran about, like, the rat and I'm trying to remember the details. I'm so bad about remembering those details. But it was a really cool story, and about like how you don't break that custom. Basically, the whole point is why you don't break the breaking the bread custom. What is it?
Guess right.
Guess right.
Guess right. You don't
Guess
break
right.
that, or you're cursed for life.
Yep.
And so I'm thinking, is that going to be their curse? The phrase "curse" is Catelyn.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that.
That'll
Because
be
I mean, they like what they
Hope
do
so.
with the Frey. They hang the Frey at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take out one Frey. Hopefully, she keeps moving up the chain.
That's what it sounded like. I mean, that was the impression I was getting. You know.
Yeah.
I have to let you go because I have another live show in 5 minutes.
Oh no.
I thought I was,
I need
Yeah.
to take off soon too. So.
Okay.
yeah, we could wrap it up. Joanna, if you want to just head off, or you can, wrap up and say just like
We can wrap up.
overall
I'm
thoughts,
very
what you're
excited to read
for.
book
I
4
was
and
gonna
5 because
ask,
it's my first time. And although I know some of the stuff that happens because I've been in this community for too long and I'm too nerdy to like avoid spoilers, but I am so excited to experience it for myself for the first time. Like I'm just very much. I haven't started book 4 just because I didn't want to, I wanted this to be
I'm
all
not
fresh.
starting until,
Yeah.
For sure.
But I'm super excited for it. So
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait.
yeah.
I can't wait because I love one POV that's coming up in book 4 and 5.
I know.
It's a new one.
Cannot wait. Can I say
There's
what
a new
it
one
is?
in 4.
Wait, I think I know
Cersei.
who it is. Okay, yeah.
You get Cersei in 4.
Oh, that's
There
so
we go.
cool.
I was going to say it. That was what I was
Okay.
gonna
I'm so
say.
excited.
It was one of my favorite perspectives in the whole series, honestly. So I was like, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to read from her perspective. Like I lived for her chapters when I read those books. So
Yeah.
Really
I'm
good.
excited then.
They're so good.
yeah.
All right, Joanna, you can
Cool. Thank
head
you.
out. Yeah, don't want to keep you too.
Hi, Joanna.
Bye.
Bye.
I get on that note, I guess if you guys want to wrap up, have any general thoughts that you want to touch on, or just talk about why you're excited for Feast for Crows or Dance with Dragons, or what you might even be anxious about if it's been a while about those two books coming out.
Yeah,
of
I
Storm of
haven't.
Swords.
I think my last time rereading them's been 5 or 6 years ago. It's been a while, so
Yeah.
I'm interested. I had always said I was going to do the shared. There's several shared reading orders between A Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons, because if you're not familiar, what George did was chop the book, and so he put half of the point of views in Feast, the other half in Dance. So there are shared reading orders between the two. I was always going to read it that way, but because of the way we're doing this read through, I'm not gonna. So maybe next time. But
Yeah.
which is fine. But because they go concurrently with each other timeline wise, so it's interesting. They set out and they tell you read this chapter in Feast, that chapter in Dance, back and forth. So one of these days I will do that. It won't be this read through, but I love both books. Feast especially sets up some really cool stuff, just seemingly out of nowhere. Like we get some more stuff about Dorne, we get some more stuff about the Iron Men, and I love all of that world building. So I can't wait to talk about that book.
Nice.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like what you're saying, like I was thinking that even with this book, I'm like, because I did that video on Jaime Lannister, I went back over all my Jaime Lannister chapters and I'm like, this is interesting. You could read the books that way. You could read just one character perspective at a time.
Yep.
If you're rereading it anyway,
Yep.
And,
I saw somebody on one of the Discord servers, they were reading one character POV at a time, and I thought that sounded super cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like if you go to like the Song of Ice and Fire wiki or whatever it is, how they break down chapters, if you ever look in those, is they have, it's like a map. They'll be like, this is the next chapter in the book, but this is also the next chapter of the character POV. So if you're just following, there's like various ways to do it, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
I have to admit that I am so ill researched on this series. So I feel embarrassed when people bring up all these things. I'm like, oh man, I don't know anything.
That's incorrect. No, there's no right and wrong way to do this, and you're obviously taking tons of awesome stuff out of it. That's what matters.
Yeah, I'm just doing the best I can and just enjoying myself because it's just so enjoyable. But yeah, I mean, one thing I'll just keep saying over and over again, I'll sound like a broken record and I don't care, is that for anybody who's afraid that like this is the, because everybody is saying this is their favorite fantasy book of all time, perhaps. Do not worry about not enjoying A Feast for Crows or A Dance with Dragons as much, because I'm telling you, if they weren't as good as they are, fans would not be begging for book 6 to the extent that they are. They would have been like, oh, don't worry, it's over after book 3. It's still really worth reading those last 2 books.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that half of the, not a problem, but half of the reason is just the fact that book 6 is going to add so much context to books 4 and 5 that I feel like once book 6 comes and people have answers, then book 4 and 5 might become way more well respected. I think it's the same way. Like if you didn't have A Storm of Swords and you just had the first 2 books, it'd be like, they're both really good, but where's it going? And
it's tough because when you peak right in the middle of a series, and the 4 and 5 are a step down from Storm of Swords, but everything else also is. So like I don't know anything that isn't a step down from that book. So it's tough because he set this insanely high bar that even he couldn't reach, but that doesn't make anything that happens in those books any less relevant or meaningful. So
I mean,
he tried to stop it. He gave them a manuscript. We gave them Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons as one book, and they were like, "We are not publishing 1,600 pages, George." He's like, "Yeah, damn."
Yeah. I know that Jimmy from Fantasy Network was saying that like Feast for Crows is really heavy, is where we get really, really heavy with the themes too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited about that experience on reread too. So
yeah, for sure.
I'm really excited for it. I've heard that Feast especially is really, really good on a reread, and especially if you're doing the series like we are, where we're kind of going right through it. So I'm really excited. It's been a long time since I've read it. I think when the show first started is when I read Feast for Crows. So it's been a while.
Yeah. I think we get more of the world too, right? Don't we go to Dorne in Feast? Is it Feast where we go to Dorne? Yeah.
Yeah, you go to Dorne, we'll go to the Iron Isles. All that stuff is really, really good.
Nice.
The Dorne stuff, I think, is probably some of my favorite stuff in the entire series. It's fun. So I'm looking forward to all of that. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yay.
It'll be cool once we get to when we get to Dance with Dragons, we could be like, so what do you guys think is going to happen next?
Yes. Oh yeah, really absolutely.
It'll be fun to kind of talk about because people have been doing it for over 10 years at this point. So I think
for sure.
No, I wonder if we'll ever get a Winds of Winter. I feel like every year everybody gets hopeful. Maybe.
I think we'll get Winds.
Winds is going to
happen. I do too. I don't think we're going to get whatever the Dream of
Spring.
I think he's so locked into having 7 books that it's almost restricting him in a way. And if he's just like, just do 8 books, then he might be like, all right, I'll put out this and then we can give myself 2 more books. But I think having everything with Winds done, that isolates him to 1 final book to wrap up the entire series. And that might just not be helping the situation.
I'm also a Ice and Fire fan that wants Fire and Ice Part 2 or Fire and Blood Part 2 and wants more Dunk and Egg stories almost as much as I want the true series. So anything George gives me in this world, I'm going to be on cloud 9 about. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
All right. Well, thanks everyone in the chat for joining. You guys were great. I loved reading the points as we were kind of going through this discussion. And thanks to you, Scott and Joanna and Joanna, who left a few minutes ago. If you guys want to just share where everyone can find you, I guess either on BookTube or on social media or whatever, and then we'll wrap it up.
Go ahead.
Sure. My name is, again, Joanna. And so you can find my channel. My channel name is Joanna, but you could also find it on the handle Joanna_reads. And I think, Alex, you'll probably link our channels in the description as well, right?
I will. Yeah, I'll be linking the channels and for sure in the description.
Yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. And if you find me there, then you can find me on other places. But I'm also active in the Grimoire Discord along with Alex too. Yes. So another place to chat.
We are heavily discussing these books in there. So if you're reading along and you want some place to kind of share your thoughts, definitely check it out because there are a lot of various thoughts going on within these books as we're making our way through. It makes it really interesting.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you.
Yeah. Scott?
And Scott, you can find me at Bald Booktuber on YouTube. I think I have the same handle on Twitter. I have an alternative Twitter account that's older where I talk about Cubs baseball and chess. So you can find me there. It's Glasgow79. I'm also very active on Mike's Book Reviews Discord. I'm a moderator there, and I pop in to Grimoire Discord when I can, as well as Jimmy's Discord and other places. But I'm not hard to track down, so I'm in a lot of places.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks to both of you, and thanks again to everyone in the chat. This was an awesome discussion. I'm looking forward to talking about Feast for Crows.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
see you, everyone.